quickly, and this is where I found the Julian gap of overly descriptive research into data journalism, is essentially an extended case study of a project called Media Mill, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. But in the process of working through that case study and with some structured interviews with people involved in a particular project, but also with people involved in related areas, I've come to think of data journalism as it's practiced at a local level, and we'll talk more about that definition of hyperlocal, as something slightly different from the kind of data journalism that we're talking about today. So that's the definition, and hopefully what I'll do over the next 10 minutes, switch my diary entry for today, is to talk to you a little bit about how I got to that definition and also the project itself. The project is a project that's funded by Innovate UK, which is the UK Government's Innovation Office, and Nesta, which is an independent, in big inverted commas, charity. It's the National Endowment for the Science, Technology and the Arts. Essentially, it's an innovation charity. And the Media Mill project was one of 4 bids that were successfully funded. It was a £2.5 million pot in the end. It involves 2 local councils, Leeds City Council and York City Council, a technology media company based in Leeds in England called EB Media, 2 open data portals, York Open Data and Leeds Data Mill, and UCLAN. So I guess in terms of transparency and accountability, I should say this research has been paid for in part by Innovate UK and by Nesta. So this is the Media Mill project. The Media Mill project essentially is a project to investigate whether there is an opportunity to create interesting and informative content at a local level using open government data as the driver. So local data journalism using open government data, but at the same time to look at whether that in and of itself might be something that might grow and sustain the hyperlocal ecosystem. So in the UK in particular, the hyperlocal ecosystem is something of quite big concern for a number of reasons which I'll go to. The main output of the project as it stands at the moment is this thing, which is called Solman. It's a data dashboard application. And essentially what it allows you to do is take data from an open government data portal, but not exclusively. If you have a source of data, you can take that, and essentially allows you to create or to use a number of preset web applications, so these are little standalone web applications, to visualize or present that data. And users can create their own dashboard from that, so it's not preset. But one of the things that we've been experimenting with is creating one of these directly for the council, so built on council open data. This is, I'm doing that wonderful thing where I'm showing you pictures of software, but this is actually functional. If you have a look at the slides, there's a link to it. It's also open source, so you can download it from GitHub. So you can see there are a number of different things: freedom of information requests, statutory notices, river levels, footfall in the city centre. All of these are data sets or data that have been made available as government data. So that's the main output of the project. In the process of kind of working through that, we've also been experimenting with what you might call more traditional forms of media content for a number of reasons. And so just as an example, a video was made around air quality and other environmental data, lots of data-driven stuff, and even print publications. So EB Media also have a hyperlocal print publication called City Talk. We'll put that in there. So we've been experimenting with lots of different forms of content. But in particular, what I've been looking at as part of the research in the paper were 3 distinct areas that are driving, that kind of sit behind the process of the Media Mill, but are also driving some of the innovation and have driven me to kind of decide that there is this thing called hyperlocal data journalism. The first one is open government data, and we've heard a lot about that already. It's kind of one of those terms that's used interchangeably with open data, even though it's not the same thing. And we've already seen that there's a dominant form of the source of data is government data. So essentially what we've got with open government data is public sector information that's been made available to the public as open data. Open data basically an ideological movement more than anything else that says that you should make your data open, not only in the process that you share it, but also open in terms of the artifact. So the process must be open, free from restriction, but the artifact must also be open, free from restriction. And that's interpreted in a very technical way. So your spreadsheet must be a CSV, not an Excel. Or even better, it should be JSON and XML, because that's more open, because you can do more stuff with it. So open data, in combination with the government's drive to be more transparent and accountable has resulted over a period of years, because of a lot of kind of lobbying, but also some policy decisions both in the UK and the EU and the world, to kind of bring in, on top of transparency and accountability, this open data, this technological reading of open data that includes social and economic value. So open government data isn't just about data that makes it easier to hold local government and government to account. It's also about how that data is then used to make citizens' lives better, and also about generating revenue. So there's an impact on the information economy. So ultimately, at this point, I'm thinking about open government data as a social technical process. And for me, that social technical process is a kind of mystical way of viewing data as a magical object. It's a machine in which you can put a data set, pull a lever, and it compresses social, democratic, and economic value into that. So each piece of data has the potential to be democratically, economic, and socially active. Hyperlocal is another one of those terms that gets bandied about a lot, but it's actually quite a contested definition. To start with, I've been using the definition that was put forward by Nesta, who are part funding the project. But it would be fair to say, and I would be honest with you, if we had stuck with that definition, or that definition was universally accepted. And there are two issues that are of primary concern for me in this definition. The first one is that hyperlocal is a technologically deterministic definition. It implies that there is some form of web delivery or digital delivery, and there are lots of people who have a problem with that. So there's an academic in the UK called John Pigman, who takes great pains in kind of making the distinction between hyperlocal and community media, who in some cases have been kind of in existence long before the web, so community radio, community newspapers, community newsletters and things like that. Pigman's particularly concerned with the idea that as soon as we start talking about policy decisions around hyperlocal, in particular when we start talking about democratic deficit, so hyperlocal's capacity to be able to step in and fill the gap left behind by traditional journalism as it hitches up its skirts and runs away from the lack of money that's there, then it is a problem, because if government starts to legislate on the basis that hyperlocals are digital platforms, then that's a problem for the sustainability of the broader sector. So many hyperlocals, whilst there's good evidence to suggest they behave journalistically, most wouldn't self-label as journalism organisations. In fact, some would go as far as to not label themselves as journalism organisations. To be fair, in terms of my conversations, most of them don't care. There's a great statement got from a case study which is that I don't care. If you want to call me a hyperlocal and I get some money, I'll take the money, I don't care what it's called from that point of view. And then finally, we've got data journalism. And kind of, I suppose I'm shoehorning data journalism in here a little bit, but I'm taking data journalism to be an enabling process. So if we are talking about accountability and transparency, then journalism has always been part of that enabling process. And if the mechanism of transparency and accountability is data, then obviously data journalism is one of the responses to that. So if I'm going to be talking about an environment where we're using open data to describe different relationships and different opportunities for hyperlocals to do what it is that they do, then data journalism seems to be a good way to think about that. That said, as I guess today and the next 2 days will prove, it's by no means a universally agreed phrase like hyperlocals or to some extent like open data. One of the areas that's of particular interest to me is a subset of journalism called innovation journalism, and in particular a reading of data journalism that contributes to the idea of innovation journalism. My experience and my literature review and my interviews suggest that innovation only happens within journalism. That data journalism is seen as a mechanism to release innovation within the practice of traditional media. So data journalism is seen as a way to make it more effective in its accountability role. Data journalism is seen as a way to bring interesting people into the newsroom to broaden the culture. It's about the benefit to journalism, not the benefits of the journalism that it does. But there is an argument, and Ginner makes a good case for this, that on the basis of innovation journalism, then data journalism, particularly open data journalism, could contribute to that. So we have this environment where we've got I've run out of time. Okay. So we have this environment where we have hyperlocals who are focused not just on accountability and transparency, but also representing the community. We have open government data, which has within it transparency and accountability, but also an emphasis towards social and economic benefit. And we also have data journalism, which at its heart has accountability and transparency. My argument is that there are emerging practices that suggest that whilst data journalism is the enabling process, transparency and accountability is not the driving force. It's also not where there is perhaps most value at a local level. So one of the examples I've been looking at is an effort called Herbs Media, who take open government data and transform that into newswire content. And it isn't complicated newswire content, it's text-based. And they yesterday announced more investments. So they partnered with one of the largest news providers to kind of extend the model of data-driven storytelling. But it's also, as I say, not just within the kind of local area. Innovation in data journalism, particularly using open government data sets, is recognised by large organisations like Trinity Mirror and their data unit, who recognise that open government data is essentially low-hanging fruit. It's data that nobody else uses. And in particular, when you're driving outside of the news agenda, something that's resource-based. So it's more engaging, it's more interactive, it's not necessarily just saying, look, here's a number and here's why it's kind of interesting. So this overlapping democratic, social and economic thing of value is this bit that I'm interested in. And that's where the definition comes from. It comes from these overlapping things, and it stretches to this idea of not accountability and transparency, not even democratic value, but civic value, which I think encompasses all of those things, but has an emphasis on benefits to society rather than benefit to the individual organisations, and the specific interest in social and economic value. There are some problems. Technical issues still pervade. There's also an urban bias that's starting to appear in open government data and open data. It's very city-focused. Access to data is problematic. As that city bias comes in, we also have issues of the kind of rural divide. If you don't have a data hub, can you get access to data? Or yes, you can, but that's then more controlled by government. We also have problems with building best practice because of the kind of spread of the network of hyperlocal. It's not a coherent thing. And also, and building on some of the points that were raised this morning, we don't really have an effective way in data journalism of measuring the impact of what we do. We talk a lot about why it's important, but we don't really know whether it's making a difference. So these are some of the conclusions that I've ended up drawing in terms of issues that we need to respond to. But more broadly, as an emerging theme, and I'm not by no means at all it's saying that this is a definite thing, it recognises emerging practice and it puts the emphasis, I think, on us exploring outside of traditional values of accountability and transparency, and not being afraid, particularly within journalism, to think more about our social responsibility and also the broader economic value that we can play a part in general. A rattle through, but thank you.
Do you have questions for Andrew? No questions?
Sorry, can I just say, the paper, this presentation, and all of the other details. So if you go here, Noda16, you'll find this presentation is all in. Snap it away. I'll get that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we welcome Paul Bradshaw.